The University of Birmingham has won a big award to help support Britain's first centre dedicated to the study of character, values and virtues. The money for the Jubilee Centre for Character and Values comes from the Templeton Foundation, which describes itself as a philanthropic catalyst for discoveries relating to the big questions of human purpose and ultimately reality. Professor James Arthur is the director of the new centre, and we're also joined by Andrew Copson of the Humanist Association. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Professor Arthur, character used in this particular way is rather old-fashioned. I mean, nothing wrong with that, but you mean something more than personality, don't you? You mean a particular kind of character.
Well, I do. I think character is made up of a set of values that normally guides our lives. It's about the moral quality and direction of one's decisions and behaviour in life. Moral education focuses almost exclusively on the ethical dimensions of the individual and society, while character development connects these moral dimensions of education to the social and civic aspects of the lives of young people.
And when you talk about the moral dimension of character forming, do you mean a specifically religious dimension?
No, I mean a whole range of philosophies, a whole range of religious and non-religious ideas. So it's not exclusively or even primarily a religious idea.
Andrew Copson,
Yeah.
Would you accept the principle, I mean, leaving aside the second part of what the professor said, but would you accept the principle that character of the kind that he describes is something we lack today?
Well, I don't think that we lack it in particular, and I don't think that the link that James sketched out between character and social morality is necessary. I don't think that you need to bring the idea of character into morality to connect morality with wider society. I think that the same principles that guide us in our personal morality, our obligations to other people, our connectedness to other people, our relationship to other people, our ability to reason about what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do, those same principles that we can use as part of the process of morality in our own lives can also be the same principles we use in our social morality. And I think what's confusing sometimes about the idea of character education is, what particular sort of character are we talking about? Who decides the characteristics that will be, become part of character education and the ones that are useful for society?
Well, James Arthur, perhaps you could tell us what those are for you, what characteristics you believe should form part of character education or character formation.
Okay. Well, first of all, I agree with Andrew that the matter is complex and potentially controversial. But at the basis of character, we have social and personal education, which helps children develop the skills and the competencies necessary to live in society and also go on and take on particular roles within society. And this is where the civic and the social dimension comes in. We've seen the scandals and the various professions, MPs' expenses, the bankers. We've seen doctors and nurses in the hospitals in Staffordshire, for example. Many people died there. There is a real concern within society about the wider context, about professions and education.
Forgive me, but you really think you can wrap all those things up together, do you, and say that those are down to a lack of what you'd call character?
I think there's an element of, when you look at the basis of character, which is the virtues, being honest, being trustworthy, showing a sense of concern for others and your neighbour. I think these things can come back to the idea of character. Yes.
Let me put that to Andrew Copson. Both that fact, that connection, but also the little idea that I saw the note of the professor slipped in there that virtues are the basis of character.
I think that's where it becomes incredibly complicated. I mean, I agree with your question back to James of, don't all these different things that seem to be tied together in this idea about riots and nurses and, phone hacking and so on, don't they all have different causes, in fact, and don't they need to be treated in a more complex manner than just to wrap them all together in character? I very much agree with that. But this idea of virtues, I think, is where it becomes even more complicated, because there is an approach to morality which has it that morality is something that consists of virtues, that what we need to do is we need to know what the right sort of acts are, what the right sort of attitudes are, and once we know those, we can sort of absorb them and assimilate them, and then we can automatically do a good thing, the good thing. But I don't think morality is really like that, and I think that sort of approach to morality risks us becoming mindless and automatic and unresponsive. responsive, because I think morality is more about looking at a situation on its own terms, being responsive to changing context, using maybe certain underlying principles of empathy, but ultimately reasoning out what we should do.
I suppose, Professor, that brings me back to the question of religion, which I put to you earlier on, because a lot of people would associate the idea that you can identify virtues which you use as the basis for forming character. You would identify that with religion, or at least with a religious approach.
You could, and in some cases that's how some schools, for example, would adopt a character development program, but other schools may adopt a character development program by using the Aristotelian virtues. You can use a number of approaches. It's not just religious. So, you have to think of it in a much wider context rather than just the religious.
Well, address the deeper point that Andrew Copson made, that there are two ways of approaching morality. One which you seem to adopt, in which morality flows from principles, virtues, call them what you will, and one which is, to use a slightly ugly phrase, more contextual, which I think is what Andrew Copson is talking about.
Well, I agree that, reason is absolutely at the heart of this. If there are no good reasons for the virtues that one adopts in life, then, why is one adopting them? But when we were conducting research over the last 3 years with about 6,000 students, we discovered that there was a real loss of language of virtue. Many of the students were unable to express themselves in moral terms. They were unable to identify the virtues. They may have intuitively known that murder was wrong, or killing someone or stealing was wrong, but they were unable sometimes to justify and explain that.
Very interesting. We've nearly run out of time, but I'd just be interested to hear Andrew Copson's response to that.
I think it's very important to be able to give young people, all people, the means to talk about morality seriously, but I don't think that necessarily has to be within a vocabulary of virtue and character. I mean, I think this work is extremely interesting, and I'm really looking forward to the British Humanist Association feeding into this big consultation that's going on. But I think that, it can too easily shade into a very moral authoritarian approach, and we need to also uphold the liberal
leave
side.
it there and perhaps come back
to you.
Avoid
that.
And
yes,
perhaps come back to you both
sure
further down the line when some of the work has been done. Thank you very much.